Hey, this is Mohal Joshi from Los Angeles, California. I follow Indian foreign policy and defense with a special focus on Asia. You can follow me on Twitter at Mohal Joshi.
Hey, this is Kishor from Bengaluru in India. I am an international relations expert specializing in global security, conflict resolution, and international negotiation. My focus areas include peace building and digital diplomacy. You can find me on Twitter at Veggie Diplomat. Hello and welcome to episode 5 of India Rising Strategic Affairs Conversations with Mohal and Kishor. Maldives went to polls on Sunday, 23rd September, to choose its next president. Being a nascent democracy, these were its third democratic presidential elections. The incumbent President Abdulla Yameen was pitted against a joint opposition candidate, Ibrahim Mohamed Solih. In an outcome that surprised most observers, the opposition candidate trumped the incumbent president and is all set to become the next president of the Republic of Maldives on November 17th. In today's episode, we discuss the importance of Maldives in the South Asia region in general and in the Indian Ocean region in particular. And in the backdrop of the presidential elections, we analyze its impact on India's foreign policy. But before we dive into the details of the elections, it is pertinent to understand the significance of Maldives as a state of significance in the Indian Ocean region. Maldives is a small littoral state just south of Lakshadweep Islands in the Indian Ocean. They sit just south of the crucial shipping lanes, and traditionally it has been in the Indian sphere of influence. In fact, in 1988, when a coup d'etat attempted by hired mercenaries overthrew the then President Maumoon Abdul Gayoom, the then Indian Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi dispatched 1,600 troops to restore the status quo in Maldives in an operation codenamed Operation Cactus. India received gratitude and praise from both Maldivians and Western powers alike for this quick and prompt military action. The first multi-party presidential elections were held in Maldives only in 2008 when Mohammad Nasheed defeated the incumbent President Maumoon Abdul Gayoom, who had been the president for 30 long years. Nasheed continued the pro-India tilt in the Maldivian government and had excellent ties with New Delhi. However, Nasheed was later forced to resign in controversial circumstances in 2012, which he claims was at gunpoint and was replaced by his deputy, Muhammad Wahid Hassan. Muhammad Wahid Hassan never lost an opportunity to rub the Indians the wrong way. In fact, Wahid also cancelled the contract given to the Indian business firm GMR for the privatization of the Malé International Airport, which was awarded to it by the previous Nasheed administration. Wahid infamously gave GMR just a week to get out of Malé, and India was left red-faced, seething with anger, never knowing the actual reasons for the cancellation of the contract. In the subsequent elections in 2013, the current President Abdulla Yameen defeated Mohammad Nasheed.
So, since coming to power, Abdullah Yameen has slowly turned his rule into more of a kind of a de facto dictatorship where he has crushed dissent and jailed his opponents. Now, this reached a climax just in January of this year, where the Supreme Court had removed the terrorism charges against opposition figures. So Yameen, in turn, to override this decision which he didn't favor, he declared emergency and even arrested 2 Supreme Court justices. He even went to the extent of arresting his own half-brother and former President Gayoom. Now, Nasheed, who was in exile, escaped being jailed. At that time, the US, India, and several other countries issued strong statements to Maldives to show respect for the rule of law. Now, while India had been disapproved of happenings in Malé, it had contemplated intervening to restore the rule of law. However, the situation is much different from 1988 where you can't just simply launch a military operation to restore order because due to the presence of China. So China, after this incident earlier this year, issued a veiled warning against foreign interference in Maldives, implied that India shouldn't take any military action. For the past few years, be it the cancellation of the Malay airport deal or awarding it to the Chinese or the signing of the free trade agreement, which, mind you, was rushed in complete secrecy in the dead of the night through parliament, the Chinese influence has steadily grown in the Maldives. So, with the military option off the table, like if you see the other, India is like basically hamstrung with a lack of good options. India and Western countries can impose hard-hitting sanctions, but Maldives also has been turning slowly to China and Saudi Arabia for funds and money, which means the sanctions could be counteracted by getting money from Saudi Arabia and China. Now, it has been pretty much clear that Yameen is no friend of India. Um, the ex-president Nasheed, like while in exile, he had mentioned that China has taken over six of the islands and has been quoted as saying that without firing a single shot, China has grabbed more land than the East India Company at the height of the 19th century. In February 2018, it was reported in the news that China was going to set up an oceanic station in the northern Maldives island close to India. So this would not have probably any military value in my opinion, but this also allows them to now track movements of surface ships and submarines which just pass south of the Indian peninsula, which will erode for India's advantage in this region. Interestingly, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has made it a point to visit all the SAARC countries except Maldives. I mean, Pakistan was visited on a brief stopover on Nawaz Sharif's birthday, so I'll count Pakistan in for now. So this has been a snub to the regime, which has been blatantly anti-India for the last few years. In fact, Modi cancelled his visit to Maldives, which was part of a four-nation visit to the Indian Ocean neighbors, as Maldives had arrested its ex-president Nasheed at the same time. So, in bit of like statecraft or polity, whatever you call it, with there were some UN Security Council elections for the Security Council. So there were a turn of Asia to select a new non-permanent member. So what India did was there were basically two candidates. There was Indonesia and Maldives. In the beginning, it was just so like India would support Maldives because it is one of its crucial neighbors. But as it was unhappy with the developments in Maldives this year, what it did in terms of true statecraft, it changed its vote from Maldives to Indonesia, and Indonesia ended up getting selected as a non-permanent member of the Security Council. So the only advantage that India has is like compared to China is the geographical proximity to Maldives, which means that India can land troops if necessary within in the Maldives within a couple of hours, while the Chinese ships which are sailing from the mainland would take more than a week. So another interesting fact was that China, though it has entrenched itself well in the Maldives, it didn't even have an embassy prior to 2011. So China, since establishing its embassy in 2011, has established rapidly expanded its support for infrastructure development in Maldives. Uh, and as I mentioned earlier, there was as part of the several pacts which were signed, one was the free trade agreement. So Mr. Yamin has not only fully endorsed the Maritime Silk Road Initiative of China, but also has made Maldives the second country in South Asia after Pakistan to enter the free trade agreement. Now, regarding the political crackdown, Abdullah Yamin, he enforced a state of emergency and ordered security forces into the Supreme Court and arrested the former president. which the opposition has called as a purge in the purging of the opposition. Now, during the emergency, interestingly, Maldivian government sent special envoys to friendly countries, which included Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and China, to apprise them of the situation. Now, India wasn't included initially, which is surprising because of the India first strategy that they that they supposedly follow. The Maldives government later tried to play down it, saying that the dates didn't suit New Delhi. Also, like they have been receiving like almost like 160 million in aid from Saudi Arabia during the emergency, and Yamin has continuously issued cryptic messages to India to prevent any military intervention in India. And Yamin also has tried to rub India's nose in it by like, as you know, there are a lot of people who work in Maldives through work visas. So as per some reports, like more than 2,000 visa holders have received to fail their extensions or the work visas getting renewed after they expired. Uh, so this was like Yamin trying to show India that he's not going to be getting cowed down with their threats. Interestingly, Nasheed had asked for military intervention, as did BJP MP Subramaniam Swamy. But Emi had to quickly put out a strong statement saying that the views of Mr. Swamy were in his personal capacity, and the government didn't entertain that same view of that a military intervention was needed.
Yeah, so all this actually increased the expectation and the hype around the presidential elections that were conducted last week. As much as Yamin was becoming unpopular outside Maldives, at home too his popularity had nosedived, and the rest of the political parties formed an electoral alliance to defeat Yamin. In this regard, the joint opposition put up Ibrahim Mohamed Solih as their candidate. 54-year-old Solih has been a career politician known to be one of the closest friends of former President Nasheed. As the election dates approached, Yamin's high-handedness reached epic proportions. He tried to influence the election commission's handling of the elections, in addition to raking up old corruption cases against his political opponents. Incidentally, Indian journalists were added to a list of international observers who would go and observe the actual elections taking place. But not surprisingly, they were not provided visas to travel till the last minute. One day before the election, Maldivian police shut down the opposition's election office. This prompted the British High Commissioner to Sri Lanka and Ambassador to Maldives issue a statement saying that they were very concerned about the happenings. Similarly, the United States chargé d'affaires to Sri Lanka also issued a similar statement expressing concern about the happenings in Maldives. On the voting day itself, while a total of 262,000 odd Maldivians were eligible to vote, approximately 90% of them turned out to vote. An interesting tidbit about Maldives elections is that Maldivians living in Sri Lanka and Malaysia can vote in their national elections in Colombo and Kuala Lumpur. Unofficial results that were announced the same day indicated that the opposition candidate had won. Ibrahim Solih had won by garnering 58% of the votes, whereas the incumbent Yameen could manage only 41%. Indian Ministry of External Affairs unusually issued a statement even before the Maldivian Election Commission announced the results officially. Similarly, the US too issued a statement urging calm and respect for the will of the people. A day later, Yamin conceded and in a speech indicated that he won't be quitting politics and would continue serving the people of Maldives. Ibrahim Solih announced that Modi had called him up to congratulate and also invited him to New Delhi. While accepting the invite, Solih also assured Modi that India will be, in quotes, closest friend of all time. On the other hand, China too welcomed the successful completion of elections and congratulated Solih on winning. While all this was happening, news came out that Yameen's legal affairs minister was actually trying to get the election results annulled by the High Court. It, however, succeeded in getting the announcement of official results delayed by claiming that frauds were committed during the elections. But this was quickly followed by support of the armed forces to Solih. And the election commission finally declared the results. And it is now to be seen how smooth the transition will be. In fact, Maldives will witness a rather long transition period until 17th of November when Solih will be sworn in. Modi has now been invited to the swearing in ceremony of President elect Solih.
So the result does validate India's strategic patience to await the election result without being forced into any military intervention into the domestic affairs of a friendly neighbor. The election result will reopen avenues for mending fences and bringing India-Maldives ties to an even keel. The root of the cause of the mistrust between India and Maldives, the Chinese footprint, has been growing in the archipelago. Now, this result uh, should provide an opportunity for India to gain some lost ground. There should, however, be no doubt that even a friendly Soli government will continue to balance China and India, more in a nuanced manner. China is likely to mount a major effort to protect its strategic investments and its ongoing projects in Maldives. Soli will certainly be wooed intensely by China. India, unable to match China in the money power, has to use another tools at its disposal to ensure that Maldives doesn't cross any strategic red lines, like allowing China to build any military or security facilities on the island. Now, Mr. Yameen's ouster has certainly produced a favorable outcome for New Delhi. It should seize the moment to rebuild ties with Malay. Now, as per my opinion, it would be better for Prime Minister to visit once the government is settled, so they can discuss the affairs at length. If he goes in for the swearing, it will be a good photo optics. But they might not be able to get much done. It would be better, in my opinion, to, let's say, send the External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj or the Vice President Venkaiah Naidu. Now, this also shows that the lessons were learned from Nepal. The lesson learned from Nepal, the 2015 blockade, and the Maldivian experience of 2018 is that India has to use its levers of statecraft to secure our interest uh, in a way that it doesn't hurt the common man like it did for the common folk in with the blockade in Nepal, and it which in turn had a negative effect because it increased the anti-India sentiment in Nepal. But to use the levers in such a way that the regime is impacted and they send the message about our interests. So what we need to do is be firm about our security concerns, but be polite while listening to their concerns. Basically, what I meant to say is avoid the overbearing big brother syndrome, telling them that what is best for them. Regarding the debt, you can change your government overnight, which the Maldivians did, but you cannot change your debt position. The Chinese are bound to stay. They might be kicked out of a few projects. The good part is that the relationship which had tilted too much towards China will now return to a balance between India and China. And as far as India, we shouldn't just celebrate the victory and forget about Maldives. India will have to shower love on Ibu Soli for weaning it away from China on a more sustained basis. Also, on the long run, it will be interesting to see if this joint opposition unity, where they put up one single candidate, lasts, or whether China will try to buy off coalition partners to stay relevant. So this will be, as I say, another interesting chess match in what I call the great game between India and China.
Indeed. So, yeah, and my take on it is that what we are witnessing in Maldives repeatedly is actually mere political realignment to defeat the incumbent. So, this has been the third presidential election, and each time the incumbent has lost to a joint opposition candidate.
Or what you call Mahagathbandhan.
Mahagatbandhan in the Indian political lingo. That's right. Yeah.
Context. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So while such realignment don't bode well for political stability within the nation, it also causes much damage to regional and global policies that the nation wishes to pursue. In this regard, India will be forced to look beyond mere political parties that are friendly to India, as such closeness might evaporate quickly, unable to withstand external pressures. Therefore, it becomes imperative for India to not just engage the political leadership of the day, but also to strengthen the state institutions like the Election Commission, the Human Rights Commission, the Supreme Court, and other such institutions, which hopefully will work for establishing the rule of law and strengthen the democratic forces within the country, helping the administration to reverse any steps taken by the dictator that had harmed the well being of the nation, be it socially, politically, or even economically, becomes key in this regard. And that should form the true agenda for New Delhi's re engagement with Mali.
Yeah, I mean, I think our former secretary Shyam Saran, in an article earlier this year, when the emergency was imposed, like rightly said that, I mean, in 2018, it might be the wrong time to intervene militarily. The time to go was technically in 2012, where Nasheed was removed at gunpoint,
Right.
and the democracy process was not followed. So he did appeal for intervention, but I mean, the previous government, maybe it was in election mode, was looking to the 2014 general elections. Then the UPA government didn't do anything, and we missed an opportunity. So as you just mentioned, like Kishore, like the democratic institutions need to be more made stronger, so such a coup doesn't occur, which is harmful for Indian interests, because what we have seen is, since that throwing over of Nasheed in 2013, the India relations have steadily gone downhill.
Exactly.
And luckily, we caught a break, because everybody just thought that, okay, Yameen is going to rig the elections in his favor, and it's going to even go further down. So we shouldn't be left at a position that we are staring down the barrel of the gun, that there's nothing we can do and we are helpless. So it would have been
Oh,
better to
yeah.
do the
Oh, and
intervention back and then.
looking at all the reports that we have got, we have enough indications to claim that Yamin actually tried to rig the elections. So it was not that he didn't; he actually did, but probably he was too overconfident for his own good.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, usually the incumbent has lost. So that, in looking in hindsight, that was a trend which everybody did miss. But the the point I'm trying to make is, like, the intervention has to be done at the correct time, and that would have been the correct time to intervene. But the previous government, for all its wisdom, like, didn't want to intervene. And like the problem could exponentially grow much larger than what it would have been today. So
Yep.
like it's time to build up the ties now, since that we should just seize this moment to rebuild the ties. And also, I mean, grant you, like, Nasheed was no fan of India, as per like many reports. Like, he was also trying to balance China. So now this is where the small state uh, balancing comes in. So all these nations, what they do is they try to balance India versus China. Now let's say, like, maybe a few decades ago, like, India was the sole power in the region, so India could choose to ignore like the interests of these nations and have no implications at all. Now what has changed is another, we are no longer the only game in town, right? I mean, China does want to invest, and even though it's like depth trade diplomacy, as many of us have pointed, but they also, so now what the country, small nations do, they try to balance off India by China. What happened in Yameen's case was really bad, because if some kind of balancing is okay, just like you see, we tried, India tries to balance with Russia and US, right? So these countries, they try to
Yeah.
balance India versus China. But unfortunately, if things go wrong, then you could have a case where you could completely go towards China and have a huge security risk in your neighborhood. So that's the thing, like, the small nation balancing is going to happen. There's no way to avoid it. We just have to make sure that none of these nations, they can balance all they want, but our red lines cannot be crossed at any moment. So back to the point of Nasheed, like he was no fan of India, but I think maybe there might be some thinking within New Delhi that hey, Nasheed was no longer not a fan of India, so it's okay if he gets replaced. Maybe that might be the thinking, but that was wrong thinking because they didn't think about the strategic Indian interests, which would be harm for the next 5 to 6 years.
Yep. And in that case, they were actually deposing an elected president, uh,
Yeah, exactly.
which actually again went against the rule of law.
Yeah, I mean, and
Okay.
still, the other thing is that 2 month gap also is a kind of concern, in my opinion, because I mean, like Yamin would demit office, but let's say all the controversial deals he signed, maybe he might try to destroy paperwork or try to make some arrangements where they are never disclosed. So that's other point of concern that India has to stay vigilant in the
Yes.
next 2 months that no funny business is done by Yamin before he demits office in November, mid-November.
Yep. And we have to continue watching Maldives ever so closely.
Yeah.
Okay. So dear listeners, if you are listening to our episode for the first time, each episode we recommend to you any book, article, or any other read that we feel might interest you. Keeping the practice going, Mohal, what is your recommendation?
So my recommendation for this week is the article on the recent developments in the Maldives, including the elections by Harita from Mindmakers, and I
Mm-hmm.
believe we'll provide a link with the podcast to the article.
So, you want to tell what the article covers?
Yeah, it does cover the history of Maldives and the India and the China angle and how it impacts the India Maldives relation.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. My recommendation is a book titled Operation Cactus, drama in the Maldives by General Ved Prakash Malik. As I already pointed out earlier in the episode, the Rajiv Gandhi administration had sent out troops to Maldives to defeat the coup that had been staged. So this book by General Ved Prakash Malik is actually about that operation. This was a unique mission for the Indian Army. Within hours of receiving an appeal for assistance from the government of Maldives, Indian troops rescued President Abdul Gayoom and foiled a coup d'etat attempt by rebel forces led by Abdullah Lutufi and assisted by the Tamil secessionist group from Sri Lanka called the People's Liberation Organization of Tamil Eelam. On the notice of a few hours, the Indian military put together a strong task force that flew non-stop over 3,000 kilometers from Agra to Malé and restored the Maldives government's control over the capital. In this book, General V.P. Malik tells the story of this coup and the alacrity, expertise, and meticulousness with which it was executed. In the process, he focuses on the decision making processes that were followed at the political and military strategic levels, as well as at the operational level. He writes about defense and military diplomacy and provides a historical as well as a futuristic perspective on India's higher defense management. Go ahead and read this book, guys. It is actually a fascinating read. A very short book, hardly about 26 pages, but I'm pretty sure you would actually like it. So that, dear listeners, wraps up today's episode on the 2018 presidential elections in the Maldives. We hope you now have a vivid understanding of the impact it might have on the India-Maldives relations. On a lighter note, we also feel you are now able to distinguish between the Gayums, Nasheeds, Yamins, and the Solis and their India policies. If you have any comments or suggestions, do let us know by commenting below. To continue hearing about such interesting topics, do subscribe to our channel India Rising and also tap on the bell icon to be notified whenever a new episode becomes available. Until the next episode, this is Mohal and Kishor signing off.